ions in a solution prepared by diluting 50 milliliters of 1 molar sodium sulfate to 200 milliliters. And so this is going to be a question, there's that key word, diluting. So let's write our dilution formula. Always a good place to start. Every once in a while, it won't be the answer, but it is the answer this time, or at least part of our answer. So we're asked for sodium ions, but we're given sodium sulfate. So let's work with the sodium sulfate first. I have 50 milliliters of, which means times, 1 molar sodium sulfate. And since my 50 milliliters is my smaller volume, that's going to be my V1. I'll figure out, so, and this is, by the way, I am working this to determine the concentration of the sodium sulfate first. Then I'll worry about finding the sodium ions. There's a couple different ways to do it, and this is my preferred way. I'm open to other possibilities too. I don't have my M2, but I do have my V2. So I can solve for my M2 just like I did in a previous video, homework video. 50 divided by 200. Well, I'll do it on my calculator anyway. So 50 times 1 is just 50. Divided by 200. I get 0.250 molarity sodium sulfate. Now at this point, there's a couple ways to do it, and it depends on how you want to do it, but you can do it by thinking about it in your head. So what I mean by that is, if the molarity of sodium sulfate is 0.250 molar, and there's twice as many sodiums, then the concentration of the sodium ions will be twice the concentration of the sodium sulfate. So you're going to double it because you have 2 of these. I don't know, that's a thought process approach. Here's how I can do it with a picket fence. So in order to do it though, I'm going to have to take my 0.250 molarity and break it down into moles of sodium sulfate per liter. And from there, and we've done unit conversions like this before, in 1 mole of sodium sulfate, there are 2 moles of sodium, just because of this 2 here. And I'll circle the 2, and I'll circle the 2 here to let you know that they're related to each other. And again, this is just sort of a calculation that mirrors my thought process that I mentioned before. And you can see that the concentration of the sodium ion is 2 times the concentration of the sodium sulfate. And I'm going to put it back together as molarity now. My moles of sodium sulfate cancel, and I'm left with moles of sodium per liter, which is molarity. Any questions about that? This is actually a 2-step problem. First step, dilution. Second step, break the ionic compound up into ions. And if you look at this and you say this is an ionic compound because it's got a metal ion in the front, you can also say I memorized my ion nomenclature to know that these are ions. I don't know, there's lots of forces working together, hopefully, to get you to recognize that this is an ionic compound, and we can think of it. And the other thing is, one common mistake of students is to try and break it up into sodiums, sulfurs, and oxygens. And that's where knowing your nomenclature really helps, because you know and you recognize that this is the sulfate ion, SO4 2-, and that it stays together. And in probably 3 weeks, we will show you how these the sulfur and the oxygens are bonded together, and it'll really bring home even more that this is one thing.